Hi, I'm Liz Atkinson from the League of Extraordinary Women. Now tonight I'm here to interview the incredible young lady Samantha Gash. At 26, she became the first female and youngest person to ever complete the Racing the Planet Desert series, which is actually 4 desert runs made up of 250 kilometers per race, which is pretty crazy. I've got her here tonight to actually share some of her secrets on how she dealt with the tough times and to give us females a little bit of advice on how we can actually hit our goals and achieve our dreams. So tell us a little bit about how you actually got into racing.
Well, I did do a few half marathons and, really just fun runs quite casually. And I always did cross country at high school, but nothing was really that serious. I think it was after I finished high school and I actually wanted to stay fit, and I lived right next to Listerfield Lake, so it was, an easy 6-kilometre circuit that I would just do.
An easy 6K.
But, actually, it never felt quite easy when I was doing it, but it was something I could do quite regularly. It was really close to my house. Then I decided to train for a marathon, and that was probably the most diligent I'd ever been, really, with anything. I was studying at the time. I just really stuck to an 18-week training program, and when I finished it, I was in agony. I could barely walk, and I was sitting down at dinner with a group of people, and this lady who is double my age told me that next year she was going to do 4 250-kilometre desert ultra marathons throughout the world. And I was thinking, right now I've just done 1 marathon and I can't even walk. But something about that appeals to me. I'd like to do that. And she told me about the whole idea that you're self-supported. You take everything on your pack for the whole time, and that you kind of are in this community of ultra runners, of people throughout the world. And I don't know, like from that point I really decided that's what was going to be my next goal.
Wow.
And I think I really wanted to do it because I trained with one of my close friends for my first marathon. And I started to think that if it wasn't for her and having her do the race with me, I wouldn't be able to do it by myself. So I thought, if I do a race on the other side of the world where I don't know anybody, this will be the true test of whether I can actually complete something of this magnitude on a physical level by myself.
So do you remember the time that you actually went home and told your parents and your friends that you were about to do a desert run?
Yeah, I think I slipped it in there like really casually. For my parents, it's sometimes just about like doing little drops here and there and everywhere, and then eventually, I've bought my plane tickets and I'm going overseas. And I lined it up because afterwards I was going to do a 3-month internship with the Capital Defence Office in Texas. So I just decided to take a whole semester of university, do this race, do the 3 months in Texas. My parents were shocked and they were really worried, but I didn't really expose them to the difficulties of the race. I didn't tell them about the temperatures. I didn't tell them that I was going to carry everything on my back, because I'm clearly of a quite small frame, and the idea of them thinking she's got to have 6 days worth of food in her back. I didn't tell them all that stuff.
Yeah, I bet they thought you were pretty crazy.
Yeah, my parents are used to it. It's other people that think that you're crazy with doing these types of things. My parents know me, and they're just like, another thing Samantha's doing.
So you've just always liked to have a challenge?
Yeah, but of different types. It hasn't always been a physical challenge. I think that's much more of a new thing. I like mental challenges.
Yeah.
I like to do different things. And that's why I've probably done so many different, I've worked in non-profits and I've studied 2 different degrees that are completely separate. I just really like new experiences and different opportunities.
Brilliant. So tell us, because you've obviously been studying law as well as doing all of your training and everything else, how have you actually managed your time to achieve everything that you've achieved?
It's a balancing act and it's tough. I'm not going to say it's easy to train for ultra marathons and be a law student and also have to work to pay for everything that you're doing as well. I'm a bit of an organised freak, in terms of scheduling out toilet breaks at times, to just fit in everything in the day sometimes. That sounds quite obsessive, but it does get to the point where I have lists on lists of how many things I have to do in a list to create a list, But it's also just surrounding yourself around positive people that enable you to be able to train in a way that you can still socialise with your friends at the same time. I think when you really want something, even though you're cramming so much into your day, somehow you manage to find that extra hour in the morning that it's okay to get up at 5 a.m. to do something. Or you'll stay up late to hand in an assignment because that's something that you've got to do to be able to, complete the subject, to be able to pass your degree, to be able to, go work at a law firm. If you want something enough, you'll make it happen.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about the 4 deserts that you ran in that series?
Okay, so they are 4 deserts, each in kind of a different location throughout the world. So the first one in March was the Atacama Crossing in Chile, and that was known as the driest desert in the world. And it was my first one, and I was injured going into that race. And I look back at photos at that time and I hear stories from people who I now know quite well, and I think I was a completely different person. I wouldn't say that I was insecure. Like, I always think I've been quite confident, but I knew nothing about ultra racing. I was completely inexperienced. I was going into it as someone who had just completed 2 marathons and not in a particularly great time, and I could barely walk because of the injury. So that was a really tough race for me, but it was a race where I decided to just be an observer and just do the best that I could do. I was happy to walk the whole thing if I had to. And that was a really perfect thing, because then I started to watch from other people. And from that experience, I decided to do the race in China. And that was in the Gobi Desert, and that was known as the windiest desert on earth. And yes, it was very, very windy, but it was also incredibly hot. In that race, you had mountains after mountains on the first few days, and I kept thinking to myself, isn't this meant to be a desert race, not a mountain race? I certainly hadn't trained for like going up mountains. And the third race, which was about 12 weeks later, was the Sahara Desert in Egypt. It was hot. It was like suffocating.
I bet.
And all you could see is just, sand for ages into the distance. And I think that was quite a beautiful race in many ways, because it made you feel in some ways really insignificant to everything else in the world. And I think that's scary, but it's also quite amazing at the same time. And I enjoyed that race because it was a time of like great reflection, and yeah, I met some awesome people on that one too. And the final one, 5 weeks after the Sahara, was Antarctica.
Wow.
I know. And I was 26 years of age in Antarctica thinking, I can't believe I'm here. It's like a dream to be able to go there. And, I never foresaw that I'd be able to be the person that would go at such a young age. And in this kind of capacity, running it. And I don't do very well with cold weather, I have now learned.
What temperature was it?
It wasn't actually that cold. I went to New York afterwards, and that was colder.
Yeah.
But I think, a few degrees.
Yeah.
But it was the wind factor, and the temperature can change like that. And so we always had to do like running in circles, really, really close to the shore so we could get on a boat, because that's where we slept each night. And a blizzard did come on a few times, and we were like, might have been at that point of the circle, and we had to quickly run back so we weren't stuck out.
Wow.
And that was a big challenge of that race, because normally the other races are a point A to point B. But imagine just going around in circles and not knowing when you're going to stop, because normally okay, you have to do 40 kilometres this day. But this one was all about time. We'll tell you to keep running until the weather turns bad. And one day it was for 12 hours. You're going around in 2 kilometre circuits.
So how do you prepare for something like that?
Oh, you can't. I mean, living in Australia and living in the middle of the city, basically, it's really, really difficult to be able to train for these types of conditions. Especially when you've got a full-time student, you've got to study. It's not like you can go out to the Northern Territory for 5 weeks and prepare for that type of heat. But what I tend to do is like create other, mental challenges that enable me to deal with like the huge mental challenges that I'll face when I'm out there. Because to be honest, it's the mental challenges that are harder than the physical. Even though I think when I first went and did, that very first race, I thought physically I would be under a lot of strain and stress, but it's the mental things. The thoughts of, am I going to be able to complete something of this, nature? Am I going to be able to back it up the next day? Is my body going to be too sore? Because I'd never, run 4 marathons in a row and then expecting myself to run 100 Ks the next day. And that's what you're doing.
Wow. So in terms of when you're running the desert, do you very much do it in a set pattern of 12 hours running, 12 hours sleep, or do you do it your own kind of...
Well, it's a race. Yeah, it's a race, and everyone starts at a certain time in the morning, and you've got a certain distance to cover till you get to the next camp.
Right.
So the quicker you get there, the more rest you get. And so sometimes the real challenge has to be for the people that are out there for the longest periods of time, and they get back and they've only got to, quickly got to eat their dinner and then go to bed. But in the race that I just came back from in Nepal, I was fortunate enough to get back at 11 o'clock in the morning, or by noon at the latest on the first 4 days, which meant I had so much time to recover, to eat 2 meals, to tend to my feet that are swollen, and raise them in the air and try and convince someone to give me a back massage. Enough time to do all that stuff.
So obviously when you're doing something like a 250k race, there's got to be times when your mind is just going, I've got to give up, or your body's just starting to shut down. How did you find, or what was the way that you could carry on kind of focused and keep going through that?
You know, the first day of each of these races is always my hardest. And it's probably because I go into these races incredibly undertrained. Last year 2010 was the first time I'd ever done an ultra marathon, and I'm expecting myself to do 4 of them in a year, well really within 10 months. So I never had much time between each race to train up too much, because it was always about recovery. So on day one, you're confronted with shockingly intense conditions. The terrain is difficult, your backpack is always the heaviest it's going to be because you have the most amount of food in your backpack. And those were the only times really that I ever contemplated, maybe I can't do this. Especially after the first race, I think I had romanticised the experience of being out in the desert. I remember being in China and I was expecting a desert, like a hot sandy desert. But as I said before, it was mountains after mountains after mountains. And if you knew how tall I was, which isn't very tall at all, my legs weren't all used to going up those kind of mountains. And so what do? I remember standing at the base of a mountain at one point and just crying and going, I don't think I can get to the next one. And this time it was the external support of someone else who came up to me and just kind of coaxed me up to the top of the mountain. But I managed to get there with the support of someone else. And once I got to the top, my heart rate had calmed down. I was looking at this amazing view. And I felt, I think, happy that I managed to get over that difficult time. But then I realised, it's never that long till the next checkpoint. It's never that long till the end of the day. And at that point, I know the reward of when you get to that finish line each time. The feeling that comes inside of you is so great, of success and accomplishment and pride that you've managed to push your mind and your body to a new limit. And remembering that feeling is all that I need to do in the end to kind of push me through the hard times.
So do you have some type of other reward that, something that you buy yourself or something that you do after every race?
Good question. But no, I tend to run for charity. Yeah. And that's always a big motivation, because you publicise the fact that you're doing this race, so you're making yourself accountable to all these other people who are following you, and for a charity that you're supporting. And sometimes you're if I don't finish this, maybe I won't get more money raised, or I'm letting down not only myself, but often I run for cystic fibrosis because my cousin has cystic fibrosis, and I think I surely can get through a marathon today, or I can surely get through 100 kilometres when I know the incredible pain and difficulties that children with cystic fibrosis go through on a daily basis. And I think having that perspective also helps you get through these things, because I've chosen to be out there. It's my choice to submit my body to this types of pain, but it's not the choice for these children who have these lifelong diseases. And I think knowing that, and often knowing the support that you're giving them, again, it's a motivating factor to kind of keep moving.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. So, can you tell us a story of the toughest time you remember from any of your races?
Oh, yes.
Because there must have been a few.
There's a few, but my second ultramarathon in China, it sounds like the China race was really hard.
China sounds bad.
China's hard. I didn't love China that much. It was a long day, and it was meant to be just under 100 kilometres. And we were going through a stage which they called the oven, and it had recorded temperatures of over 50 degrees. And so I was already feeling nervous about how hot this was going to be. And from this point, this was pretty much the longest I had ever gone before. And I buddied up with a New Zealand runner, Lisa Tamati, and we'd run together, previously the other days. But it was really, really difficult. I had hurt my knee 2 days prior. I could barely walk, let alone run. So I had one leg straight, the other leg bent, and I was just doing my best to keep up with Lisa, because I knew if I dropped her, or should I say that if she dropped me, my chance of getting to the finish line would be so much harder by myself. The powers in numbers is it's a strong thing. And I definitely bounce off the energy of other people, and she was incredibly experienced, and I was like, if I can stick with this experience and have someone to talk to, then I can get to the finish line. But so I'm pushing on, I didn't want to slow her down, and then all of a sudden it gets to 7 o'clock at night, and you expect the weather to start to get cooler, but no, it peaked to mid-40s.
Wow.
And it was suffocating, and we thought they were meant to be hitting a checkpoint, because these races are split up into different checkpoints. And these are, talk about short-term goals. Instead of thinking of 100 kilometres, that day I just broke it up into, 14 kilometres, or the next 12 kilometres to the checkpoint, where you refuel, your water, you eat some food really quickly, and then you move on. But at the end of the day, I know that I can always do 12 kilometres. I might not be able to do 100 kilometres in my mind, but I can do 12 kilometres. Yep. We couldn't find the checkpoint. We keep going. We projected we were meant to be there at a certain time. We're not there. And finally we see this checkpoint far in the distance. And like Lisa grabs my hand and like literally is dragging me. Like if either one of us had like let go of the other person's hand, I think we both would have just crashed on the ground. So dragging ourselves up there, finally get to the checkpoint, and I just lose it. Completely lose it. I start crying, I vomit, I collapse on the ground. I'd given everything to get to this point, and then, everything had shattered around me. I'm laying down this checkpoint, and everyone was looking at me going, this girl can't continue. And they told me that I would have to have a big rest, stop for as long as possible to be able to recharge. And then the thought that someone telling me that I have to stop, it's like something changed like that. I can't really explain it, but there is photos of me in my moment of anguish, and then a photo once I was told that I had to stop. It's like a completely different person. So even though I physically didn't think I could do it, and I thought I mentally was completely stuffed, the idea that I was told that I'd have to stop and lose that partnership with Lisa was all I needed to quickly come up, started jogging along at a very slow pace, did a little power spear, and then kept moving. And we had 21 kilometres to go for the rest of the stage of the race, and it took us 6 hours to do 21 kilometres. But we got there in the end.
Wow, well done.
Yeah.
That's really good.
So, I finished that day and I said I never want to run again. And the next morning I was like, all right, what's the next race?
So would you go and do China again?
You know what, there's so many amazing places to race in the world. There's no need to duplicate with China.
That's right. So in terms of the races, there must be, I'm guessing, a lot more guys that do this than the women. And what's kind of the majority, what's the ratio of guys to girls, would you say?
I think it's about 20 to 25% females, and the rest male. It changes in each race. The race that I did last year in India, there was more females, but it was only a race of 6. So, sometimes the longer and the more expedition-based the race is, and I'm talking about like huge distances, you might see more females, but on a race like the Race on the Planet series, 20 to 25% females. But that said, females do incredibly well. I think something about endurance racing definitely plays well to the strength of females, of staying upbeat, for being able to just slog it away, not letting the ego kind of control how you approach the race. I think females doing these types of races realise that sometimes if you start out slow, you can build up and you can get stronger and stronger. And I think there's a tendency, particularly for men and men in their 20s and early 30s, with all that testosterone pumping, like they go really, really hard.
Yeah.
And you know what? It's not a sprint. It's not even a marathon. It's 5 days back to back. And you might be able to survive day 1, day 2, even day 3, but by day 4, I've seen so many people start to crash. And then by the day 5, when you've got that really long 100 kilometres, that's when I tend to push on and actually do quite well, because I haven't burnt myself out in the previous days. But females definitely have a reputation of being quite good at ultra races and having a less dropout rate than men.
Wow, that's amazing. So from everything that you've done, I know that we were speaking before and you've got some amazing plans for this year alone. Yeah. Do you want to tell us a little bit about those?
It was a secret.
Well, we could talk about some of the other things we were talking about.
There's quite a few things. I start work this year at Baker McKenzie, so some people say that I'm entering the real world, and how do I feel about that? But you know what? You make your own real world, and I've always been someone that's juggled many things. Obviously, I'm going to have to make a few changes to the way I structure my day and the things that I do and when I do them. But I'm very much looking forward to starting work. I definitely have some expeditions planned for this year. I want to do another big desert race in Australia. Not a race, or an expedition, and that's slowly logistical preparation. I'm going to be doing kind of a volunteer-based non-profit expedition in Africa at the end of the year as well. And then I'm wanting to get involved in a lot of shorter distance Australian races. So those are things I'm doing on a kind of a running front. I'm also getting involved with, actually it's a website called Ultra 168, and it's Australia's #1 ultra running website that contains pretty much all the information that any ultra running geek would like to know. And you know what, that's what we are. We become like, geeks in our small world of ultra running, where we like to know about gear, we like to know about nutrition, we want to hear about how other people are doing in races, And that's what this website's all about. And so I'm getting on board with this website, which was set up by 5 guys in Sydney, and I'm becoming the dedicated female reviewer. Because I really believe that females have very different requirements on a nutrition basis, on a gear basis, even like how it affects the female's mind doing these races than men. And I think there's not enough information out there about that. And definitely not the most experienced person, but in my short time of doing ultra racing, I've done a lot of different races. And so, and I have a real interest in passing on information about this. So I'm getting on together with these guys as well to kind of just do more riding and getting more involved in the Australian ultra running community.
Brilliant. It sounds like you'll be a great ambassador.
Go with the girls.
Yeah, go the girls, go the girls. So obviously over the last couple of years we've seen that women are really kind of getting their place in the world. In Australia right now we've got a woman running the country obviously, and we've got Gina Reinhardt, who's now the richest person in Australia, which is great. So from your experience and everything that you've been through, what would be the best piece of advice that you would give a young female out there at the moment that has got a dream and knows that it's going to be a challenge? What would you tell them?
You know, I dabble in ultra running, and that's kind of what my passion is. But I think the skills and lessons that I've learned through ultra running are completely transferable to any goal, any audacious goal that anyone wants to set. And I think there's really 2 things that come down to it. Firstly, if you really, really want something, and you really, really believe in yourself that you have the capacity to be able to achieve it, with those 2 things combined together, I think anything's possible. It's definitely what's possible for me, and I think that when one of those things is lacking, that's when I don't necessarily achieve my goal. So it's not only really wanting something, it's having that belief within yourself that you can achieve it. And I just think that's almost a foolproof system of you then doing all the other right things. The other thing that I think is specific to females is I've noticed that whenever I have a goal that I want to do, the first person that I need to tell is another female. And I think, and there's something that I'm learning recently, I get really, really excited when I've got a new idea. So excited in fact that I almost start to pretend that it's happening. And I think that's really important for me because then I start to do all the things, you know, the logistical preparation things to make it happen. But often when I speak to some of my closest guy friends, you know, my boyfriend, the first thing that comes into their mind is, well, have you thought about this problem or that problem, or you might not be able to do it for this reason. And all of a sudden that starts to waver my belief within myself of whether or not I can do it. What I actually need is I need another highly energized female who gets pumped up and excited about my idea. And it's that kind of like excitement and buzz that then makes me go to the next step of like the practical side, all the things that you need to do to make it happen. But you need to have that like absolute unwavering commitment and excitement, belief and passion that your goal or your idea is a good one. And once you have that, you know, I just think that, you know, you can take off with it. But I think that's unique to females, and I've been speaking to a lot of people about this, and they've had similar circumstances as well. But if you're the type of person that gets excited and, you know, bounce it off with someone, and maybe it is a male in your life, but for me, I've definitely got some females in my life that I need to kind of first hit my ideas with them.
Brilliant. Well, it sounds like it's going to be an absolutely amazing 2012. I'm sure we're going to hear lots more about everything that you achieve. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.